EU is standing by Syrian people. We are the biggest donor in the context of the Syrian refugee crisis. The EU is the biggest donor for the Syrian people in need. We are offering them assistance and providing them assistance in various forms, be it directly, be it through the international organizations, NGOs, local partners, etc. We are present on the ground, in or outside Idlib. We are present around Syria. We are helping the countries which are affected by the situation in Syria in terms of humanitarian issues. We organized conferences in Brussels dedicated to the Syrian crisis to underline our dedication to Syrian people who are suffering tremendously throughout the conflict. So it's not fair to say that the EU is not doing enough or not doing much. We are the biggest donor in the context of the Syrian crisis, and we are supporting the countries affected by the Syrian crisis. The EU is consistently delivering on its promises and commitments stemming from various agreements or treaties or deals. A short while ago, you heard from my colleague how we are delivering on the promised assistance to Turkey in relation to taking care of the Syrian refugees. The commitment still stands, and we are doing step by step, literally everything to what we committed. But we expect the same level of commitment also from the other party of the agreement. That's why we keep urging and keep expecting the Turkish partners to honor their commitments stemming from this agreement, which still stands because no one formally rejected this agreement and no one cancelled this agreement. On the safe zones, the EU's engagement in affairs all around the world is based on one principle, and that's multilateral principle with possibly UN mandate. So whatever we do in Syria should have the mandate from the UN Security Council and should not be based on unilateral steps. When it comes to the return of refugees, because this is what you wanted to say, probably mentioning the safe zones, that the main idea is for the refugees to be able to return. The returns, from our point of view, are also based on certain principles which are defined by the UNHCR. Again, multilateral framework or multilateral platform. The UNHCR or the UN says that the returns have to be voluntary, dignified and safe and well informed. So far, the conditions in Syria have not been met for this criteria to be fulfilled. That's why the EU is keeping its position, be it on the safe zones or on the returns of the refugees from neighboring countries to Syria, based on the UN criteria.
Okay. Yes, you had a question, I believe, here on the left. Yeah.
Markus Becker with Der Spiegel. It seems to me that at the moment efforts are concentrated on protecting the Greek border, but maybe you can tell us a little bit if there are any preparations being made of an additional influx into the refugee camps on the Greek islands, especially when it comes to the quality of the medical supplies, the medical situation. Thank you.
It's not really for Peter at the moment. I'd like to finish questions to Peter in particular. Yes, please. We'll come back to that question.
Thank you. Will the Vice President, the High Representative Vice President, will be tomorrow in Greece, in the Greek-Turkish border too, with the President and the Vice President Skinas? And what's the purpose of the Foreign Affairs Council that will be held? What's the purpose of the High Representative? If it is one last question, but it is more about practical issues, will the result of the Council will be official or not? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. HRVP is mostly active outside the EU borders. That's his natural stage to be active outside the EU borders. So the answer is no, he will not be in Greece tomorrow, but the EU will be represented, I think, in quite full force to show our solidarity with the Greek partners. The purpose of the FAC is exactly to discuss the unfolding situation, because, as I said, for us, the main problem and the main thing on which the EU should be focused on right now is the situation in Idlib. The situation in Idlib is unbearable for the civilians there. They are exposed to indiscriminate bombings and military campaign by the regime and its backers, but also they are caught in between the confrontations between the regime, its backers, and also other forces present in Idlib or in northwest of Syria. So that's the logic, or that's that's the aim of the FAC, the extraordinary FAC, to discuss the unfolding situation in and around Idlib and to try to find the ways how the EU can engage even more to contribute somehow to reinforcing the message that there can be only political solution, ideally under the umbrella of the UN.
Yes.
Hi, Peter. Are you planning to engage Western Balkan countries in the discussion? Because the number of refugees there was increasing anyway, even before this escalation at the Turkish-Greek borders. We have heard many times from EU that EU is now much better prepared than in 2015 to deal with the crisis. Do you have any preparations with the Western Balkan countries that we don't have a scene like in 2015, countries pushing the refugees from their own territory further towards the north and west? That's one question. And second, on situation inside Syria, I listened carefully once you said with a possible UN mandate and then ideally with UN mandate. So are you excluding any engagement of international community if there is no UN mandate, because you know that if Russia doesn't want, there can never be any UN resolution?
Yes, this is what we keep repeating, I think, right since the start of the crisis, that the solution for Syria needs to be a political one, Syrian-made, Syrian-owned, under the auspices of the UN. We have the peace discussions or peace talks somehow, I mean, not really going on, but the framework is there for the intra-Syrian talks to continue in Geneva under the UN umbrella. There is UN Special Representative, Mr. Pedersen, in charge of this. So this is the desired course of action and the desired result from the point of view of the European Union as a strong advocate and supporter of multilateralism, that whatever is done on the world stage in terms of solving the crisis, it's not only Syria, it's also Libya, should be under the auspices of the UN. And that's why we are supporting the UN auspices and the UN umbrella for in this context. So that's why I said ideally, because, I mean, yes, the reality on the ground is that sometimes the developments are not as we wish, but from our point of view, in terms of our principles and desired course of actions, we see the UN in lead in this, because the UN is the platform to solve the crisis of this extent. On involving the Western Balkans and the preparations, I think this is also more for my colleagues from the Home Affairs front, but generally we are in touch and we are aligning also with the Western Balkans countries, especially those in the accession process, but with our partners in the region in general, because yes, I mean, the lessons from the 2015 crisis was that these countries were affected among the first, and since then we are having, I think, quite good coordination and cooperation, and on a regular basis they are getting European support. So this is something which I think is already like going without saying.
Okay, any other question for Peter? Thomas, is it for Peter?